Welcome to Trending Unpacked, the show where we explore the stories behind the trends shaping our world. Today, we are taking an essential look at the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, better known perhaps as SNP. Now, for millions of Americans, SNP is much more than just a government program. It is really a crucial lifeline. It's the foundational structure of nutrition assistance in the United States. But right now, this vital safety net is back in the spotlight, and frankly, for some worrying reasons. We're looking at a system facing major immediate instability. We're talking incredibly tight funding deadlines, looming policy changes, and, well, the ever-present shadow of federal shutdown risks.
Yeah, this is really a classic case of a quiet crisis, but one that affects pretty much everyone, regardless of whether you personally use the benefit or not. Because the instability in SNMP, it doesn't just threaten the food security of vulnerable families, though that's obviously huge. It also threatens local economies, and it reveals some really profound structural vulnerabilities in how we as a society address poverty today. Our mission today really is to get past the headlines, to truly understand the mechanics of what's happening here. We're going to unpack the structure, the massive scale of SNMP, review the latest policy threats that are coming out of these legislative battles in Washington, and then connect the dots, right? See how this instability impacts real people, from the biggest cities to the most remote rural communities.
Okay, let's definitely unpack this. We should probably start with the basics, just for anyone who might only know the old name, food stamps. So what exactly is SNP, and how central is it, really, to the U.S. government's overall safety net?
Well, SNMP is, without question, the foundation of U.S. government anti-hunger efforts. It's the nation's largest nutrition assistance program. It provides essential financial support, money that can only be used to purchase food, nothing else.
Yeah.
And to understand just how central it is, you really have to look at the numbers. SNMP accounts for roughly 70% of all USDA nutrition assistance spending in this current fiscal year, 2024.
70%, wow.
Yeah, it means 7 out of every 10 federal dollars that are dedicated to helping Americans get food goes through this one single program. Its scale is just gigantic. And, well, if that huge 70% component experiences some kind of shock, the entire safety net infrastructure feels that tremor instantly.
Let's talk about that scale in, human terms. We have some key data points from FY 2024 that really quantify the scope of the program for you listening.
Absolutely. So the program served approximately 41.7 million participants monthly.
41.7 million people.
Yeah.
Every month.
That's a population larger than most entire countries.
Right.
Relying on this assistance just to maintain adequate nutrition.
And when we look at the total resources, the money dedicated to this massive group, the spending figures are equally enormous. We're talking about roughly $99.8 billion in total federal spending just for this program in the last fiscal year.
Right. And, while that sounds like a staggering amount of money, and it is, when you drill down to the individual level, the picture shifts pretty dramatically. The average benefit received by a participant was approximately $187 per person per month.
Okay, wait. $187.20 a month, that's just over $6 a day.
Exactly.
And when you factor in the rising cost of groceries, everything, dairy, fresh produce, basics, $187.20, that has to be budgeted incredibly tightly just to make it to the next payment. It's really hard to imagine maintaining, a varied, nutritious diet on that kind of budget.
And, well, that brings us to a really important policy point, how that benefit is calculated. It's not just plucked out of thin air. SNP benefits are calculated based on something called the Thrifty Food Plan, or TFP. The TFP is the USDA's official estimate of the cost of a nutritionally adequate but minimal diet for a family.
Okay, the Thrifty Food Plan. That name says a lot.
It does. And the problem is, historically, the TFP has been criticized pretty heavily for severely underestimating the actual cost of a healthy diet, especially in high cost of living areas. Now, there have been some updates in recent years, some adjustments, but when you look at that $187 average benefit, you realize the foundation of this huge safety net is still built on the most constrained, sort of minimal estimate of what it costs to eat. It really means recipients are often starting the month already behind the curve, economically speaking.
Beyond just the financial constraints, something else that's fascinating here is how much participation varies across the country. SNP isn't used uniformly at all. You mentioned the program is federally funded but state administered. How does that difference play out geographically?
Oh, the geographic divide is stark, really stark, and it tells you a lot about regional economies and state policies. We see participation rates that soar as high as 21.2% of residents in some states.
More than 1 in 5 people.
Exactly. More than 1 in 5 people relying on this program. Yet in other states, that rate drops way down to around 4.8%.
Wow. That swing from nearly a quarter of the population needing help down to less than 5%, that implies some major differences. It can't just be poverty rates, right?
Does it come down to how states actually run the program?
Absolutely. That variability, it's driven by, I'd say, three main things. One, the fundamental economic health of the state. Two, state-level eligibility rules. They can make it harder or easier to qualify. And three, just how effective their outreach is. How well they connect people to the program.
So like paperwork hurdles.
Exactly. Some states make the application process much more difficult, lots of hoops to jump through, creating these structural barriers to enrollment. Also, think about states with very high costs of living, but maybe relatively low maximum benefit levels. People who technically qualify might look at the paperwork, the hassle, and decide it's just not worth the minimal amount they'd receive.
Right. Makes sense. Conversely, a state with really high participation, it might indicate deeper, more pervasive economic hardship. Or it could simply mean they have highly effective community outreach programs getting the word out.
And that variability, that patchwork approach almost, makes the current funding crisis even more alarming. And here's where it gets, as you said, really interesting and frankly quite concerning. As of late 2025, right now, SNAP funding is under direct threat. And it seems like it's a two-pronged attack. First, there's this sort of pervasive risk of a federal government shutdown that looms over everything.
Right. And second, as you mentioned, these really complex legal questions swirling around the very mechanisms used to fund the benefits themselves. We should probably clarify this for the listener because it does get a bit technical, but it's crucial. Normally, SNAP benefits are funded well in advance. Congress appropriates the money sometimes months ahead.
Okay, so the money should be there.
Usually, yes. But the current mechanism under scrutiny relates to the potential exhaustion of those advanced funds. And there are ambiguities in the USDA's ability to sort of pull from existing balances, especially if Congress passes what's called a continuing resolution, or CR, that's like a temporary funding patch without specific language protecting SNFP.
Or if the government just shuts down entirely.
Or if it just shuts down entirely. Because even if the benefit money is theoretically sitting there, many SNFP operations rely on federal administrative funding. That administrative funding stops cold during a shutdown. So the ability to actually process the payments to get the money out the door, it just comes to a screeching halt.
Okay. So the problem isn't necessarily that the bank account is empty.
Not always, no.
But that the people running the bank and the whole infrastructure to make the deposits, they're furloughed or they're legally blocked from acting.
That's a perfect analogy. Exactly right. The system relies on personnel. It relies on continuous government operation. And this isn't just, theoretical political maneuvering anymore. We are facing imminent deadlines. If Congress fails to act decisively, either addressing these funding mechanisms or just avoiding a shutdown altogether, the payment freezes are expected to start as soon as November 2025. And that's in several states, maybe more.
And the immediate real-world consequence of that is?
Food banks.
Right.
Food banks across the country are already preparing for a significant immediate surge in demand. They are literally bracing themselves to become the sole source of nutrition for potentially millions of people if those November payments are delayed or stopped.
That burden just seems immense. I mean, can the charitable sector even absorb that?
For any length of time, no. It's simply unsustainable. It puts impossible pressure on those organizations.
So, okay, beyond the immediate deadline-driven threat of a shutdown messing with payments, we also have this other pressure you mentioned, significant legislative pressure aimed at structurally changing SNAP permanently. So this isn't just about a short-term budget fight. It sounds like it's about reshaping the entire program for the long haul.
That's exactly right. We're talking about what you call the legislative pressure cooker. Lawmakers are proposing really fundamental alterations to how SNAP works. And a lot of this intent seems crystallized in the proposed policy found within what's currently being discussed, sort of floated around D.C., as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. That name itself is something.
It is.
And it focuses very heavily on tightening eligibility requirements and, crucially, shifting the financial responsibility.
Okay, let's dissect the specific changes proposed in this One Big Beautiful Bill Act, starting with the one that always gets a lot of attention. Stricter work requirements. We're talking about mandatory work hours, right? Citing an example like 80 hours per month for certain age groups just to qualify.
Yes. Now, the intent politically is often framed as, encouraging self-sufficiency, promoting work. But if we analyze the practical effect, what it would actually do, requiring 80 hours a month, that's basically 2 full weeks of work, 20 hours a week consistently, that impacts millions of people who are already working, but maybe dealing with unstable hours, fluctuating part-time jobs, gig work.
Or caring for kids or elderly parents.
Or caring for family members while looking for full-time employment.
Exactly.
For someone who is chronically underemployed, maybe working unpredictable shifts in retail or food service, a requirement like that doesn't really function as a ladder out of poverty. It risks becoming a structural exclusion from the program. It could force them to lose benefits because their work hours are unpredictable, not because they aren't willing to work.
So it ends up penalizing precarious work situations.
Precisely. This kind of proposal represents a massive shift towards a much more restrictive definition of who is considered deserving of assistance.
Then there are the financial shifts in the bill. You mentioned a reduction in overall federal nutrition funding.
Right, cuts to the top line number.
But maybe the most potent change involves state finances, proposing an increased state cost share for SNAP.
Yes, and this is where the technical details really matter. It sounds dry, but it's hugely consequential. Currently, the benefits themselves, the money people get on their EBT cards, that's 100% federally funded, always has been. States only pay for about half of the administrative costs, staff, offices, application processing, outreach efforts.
Okay.
This proposal would shift the financial burden for the benefits themselves directly onto the states.
Whoa. So if the federal government decides to cut its share of the actual benefit pool,
Then the states are suddenly on the hook to cover that gap.
or they have to cut benefits across the board for everyone in their state.
Precisely. Think about that $99.8 billion in total federal spending we mentioned.
Yeah.
Even a seemingly small percentage shift in that cost share represents billions of dollars that state legislatures, many already cash-strapped, would suddenly have to find.
And will they find the money?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? In many cases, the likely answer is no, or not fully. This would likely force them to restrict eligibility further, maybe cut benefit amounts, leading to massive, unprecedented reductions in the program's reach. It essentially transforms SNAP from what has been a reliable federal safety net into more of a patchwork of state-level programs, highly dependent on local political will and, frankly, the state's fiscal health at any given moment.
Okay, now we absolutely have to address something that always comes up in these debates. It's a persistent and pretty pervasive piece of misinformation, this recurring narrative that immigrants use most SNAP benefits, or that the program is somehow primarily benefiting non-citizens.
Yes.
That narrative is toxic, and it's incredibly effective as a political wedge, unfortunately. It makes it much easier to justify structural cuts by appealing to, frankly, xenophobia or anti-immigrant sentiment. We really have to counter this directly with the actual data. The reality check, according to the USDA's own statistics, is that approximately 90% of SNAP users are U.S.-born citizens.
90% U.S.-born. Correct.
That is a staggering, just a massive disparity between the political talking point and the statistical reality. So if 9 out of 10 recipients are citizens, working families, children, elderly citizens, people with disabilities, why does this specific non-citizen-focused narrative persist so strongly? Why does it keep coming up during every funding debate?
Well, because it's a time-tested technique of political distraction, essentially. Yeah. By focusing the debate on the perceived misuse by a very specific, often marginalized group, non-citizens proponents of reduced funding can divert public attention. They divert attention from the fact that SNAP is overwhelmingly utilized by exactly the kinds of people the system was designed to support: the working poor, seniors living on fixed incomes, families, citizens facing temporary hardship like job loss.
So it weaponizes the debate.
It absolutely weaponizes the policy debate to reduce public sympathy for a major social safety net program that benefits millions of citizens. It's a way to chip away at broad support.
Okay, shifting focus slightly to the uneven impact. If these payment freezes happen, or if major cuts go through, who actually gets hit the hardest? Where does the pain concentrate?
Well, the vulnerability factor is definitely highest in two major demographics, and they often overlap considerably. We're talking about rural areas and communities of color. Payment delays or cuts disproportionately affect these populations, and the economic ripple effect tends to be felt much faster and often more devastatingly in those communities.
Why is that connection so strong, especially for rural areas? You mentioned earlier they lack the density of support systems found in big cities.
Yeah, it really comes down to alternative support infrastructure and just basic food access. Think about it. A large, dense urban area might have dozens of major, well-funded municipal food banks. It probably has extensive public transportation to reach larger discount grocers, maybe multiple community support programs. Now, contrast that with a rural area. If the local grocery store, maybe the only one for miles, suddenly loses the SNAP cash flow from its community. And remember, these small rural stores often rely very heavily on SNAP dollars coming in.
That store could be immediately threatened financially.
Exactly. Its viability could be threatened. Simultaneously, think about the small local food pantry. It's likely volunteer-run, operating on a shoestring budget. If that pantry is suddenly faced with supplying, say, 20% of the entire county's nutrition needs because SNAP payments stop,
it just collapses.
It collapses instantly. It can't handle that surge. And this issue really exacerbates the problem of food deserts areas where residents already have limited access to affordable, nutritious food. Because once that local economy gets shocked by a SNAT cut, the entire local food access system can start to fail. The instability is just deeply consequential because there are simply fewer places for people to turn for help.
So, okay, let's try to synthesize this. We've established SNAP faces these immediate funding dangers, these legislative threats, but its importance clearly goes way beyond just providing calories. You've hinted at this, but it sounds like it's also a fundamental economic engine in a way.
That is the essential point, and it's quantifiable. It's often missed or deliberately ignored in the political rhetoric. We really need to look at the macroeconomic importance, what economists call the economic multiplier effect. SNFP benefits aren't just a static transfer of funds from the government to a person. They act as a significant and very rapid form of economic stimulus.
Okay, explain that multiplier effect for us listening. What does it mean in tangible terms? And why is the return supposedly so high compared to, say, a broad tax cut?
Right. So the analysis consistently done by the USDA and independent economists shows that for every $1 billion, that's billion with a B increase in SNAP spending, there's an estimated return of about $1.54 billion in gross domestic product, or GDP.
So every dollar out generates more than $1.50 back in economic activity.
Exactly. $1.54 billion in GDP. And the reason the return is so high comes down to something called the velocity of money. Think about who receives SNAP. They are, by definition, low income. They need food immediately. Studies show they spend somewhere between 97% and 100% of their benefit within days, maybe a week or two of receiving it.
And where do they spend it?
Almost entirely at local grocery stores, supermarkets, farmers markets sometimes. It's money that flows instantly into local retail. Then that money flows up to distributors, then to farmers, food processors, truckers, the whole food chain. Unlike money given through, say, tax cuts to wealthier individuals, which might be saved or invested slowly over time or spent on imports, SNAP money hits the domestic economy like a shot of adrenaline. It moves fast.
So it's a dollar spent that circulates almost instantly, stimulating more than a dollar's worth of activity very quickly. And that's why it's particularly effective in a slowing economy.
Absolutely. That's when that quick stimulus is most needed. The data also estimates that in a slowing economy, that same $1 billion in SNAA spending is responsible for the creation or support of about 13,560 jobs.
Wow, jobs too.
Yeah, primarily in the food retail sector, agriculture, transportation, food manufacturing. So the potential cuts or freezes we're discussing wouldn't just cause hunger, which is bad enough. They would actively damage local economies by pulling billions of dollars and tens of thousands of jobs out of circulation, potentially right when that stimulus is most critical.
Okay. So the combination then of this immediate funding crisis and the legislative push from measures like the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, it really signals something deeper, doesn't it? This isn't just temporary budget negotiation chatter.
No, I don't think it is. Taken together, they profoundly signal a potential policy shift, a directional change. When you see sustained pressure for reduced federal funding, a push for a massive increase in state cost shares, and the simultaneous implementation of stricter work requirements, it really suggests a cohesive political strategy, one aimed at shrinking the size, the scope, and the accessibility of the social safety net permanently.
So making it harder to get and harder for states to pay for.
That's the nutshell version, yes. It's essentially attempting to make the program harder to access for individuals while at the same time making it more financially difficult for states to sustain at current levels. This fundamentally changes SNAP's traditional role. It moves the program away from being that broad, counter-cyclical safety net, the kind that's designed to expand automatically when the economy tanks and people lose jobs, and it risks turning it into a much smaller, maybe more punitive program, one that only helps the sort of perfectly poor who can successfully navigate significant administrative barriers and meet strict requirements.
And the instability we're seeing now, driven by these political deadlines and legislative efforts, it really just reveals how vulnerable the whole system is. If the core system designed to catch people when they fall into hardship is itself constantly threatened by budget disagreements or policy fights, its entire purpose feels compromised.
And that instability is the key takeaway, I think, because it affects everyone. It degrades the economic stability of the entire region where those benefits are spent. Think about the ability of the local grocery store to keep staff employed, the ability of local food producers to rely on consistent demand from those stores. All of that is tied, in part, to a stable SNAP system.
Okay, so if we connect all this to the bigger picture, what should our listener, the engaged citizen who wants to understand how the country really works, what should they be monitoring in the coming months as these deadlines approach? What are the signals to watch for?
Right, this is the practical application. What do you watch? I'd say you should be watching 3 key areas very closely. First, monitor state actions regarding cost sharing. If that federal burden does get shifted, watch how your state legislature responds. Do they find the money somewhere to absorb the cost? Or do they immediately start implementing cuts to benefits or tightening eligibility rules? The response is going to vary dramatically from state to state.
Okay, state legislative responses. What's next?
Second, pay really close attention to actual shifts in benefit distribution dates. If that November 2025 deadline passes without a clear resolution, recipients desperately need to know precisely when and where payment gaps might occur. Since people are living month to month, often day to day on these benefits, a delay of even a week can be absolutely catastrophic. The news reporting around those specific dates will be the immediate flashing red indicator of the severity of any funding failure.
Got it. Benefit dates. And third,
Monitor the capacity and the resource utilization of your local food banks and pantries. Their stability and their resources are the immediate frontline emergency response mechanism when SNFP fails or is delayed. So if you start seeing their public requests for funding skyrocket, or desperate calls for volunteers, or reports of running out of food, that's a direct, localized measure of the systemic failure happening upstream in the SNFP program.
that makes sense. It's the canary in the coal mine locally.
Exactly. And it's just crucial to understand the instability in SNFP really affects not just the direct recipients, but the economic health and resilience of every community that relies on that stable cash flow into local businesses.
We've definitely covered a tremendous amount of ground today, from the details of how benefits are calculated based on that thrifty food plan, all the way to that powerful $1.54 billion GDP multiplier effect for every billion spent. I think the key lesson here really is that SNFP is one of those quiet, incredibly complex stories, but it touches millions of lives directly, and it's absolutely vital to understanding the country's broader economic and social health. Thanks for tuning in to Trending Unpacked. Whether you rely on benefits yourself, or maybe you worry about a loved one who does, or perhaps you just want to understand the machinery of our social safety net, SNFP is one of those quiet stories that touches millions, and its stability, as we've heard, is really everyone's concern. Next time, we'll dive into a very different world, the world of royalty, reputation, and reinvention. We're looking at Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and the crisis reshaping the British monarchy. We'll see you then.